A few months ago, I presented my final project for my master's degree. After I presented, I had this excitement throughout my whole body. You know, when you finished a big project, something, big achievement you've been working so hard for, and you finally get it all done, and you know that you did a great job doing it. Nothing to take away from God and his greatness, but just having that joy, the liberation of all that hard work is finally over. Just having that feeling of being almost done with my master's degree, just a little bit more work to go, and then I've graduated and I can finally start relaxing. You could not wipe the smile off my face. It didn't matter what came my way. I was able to finally relax. And one day, when Paul and I were having our bi-weekly meeting with Pastor Ken, he said, "Boys, today we're going to take a field trip." And so it's okay, Pastor Ken, what you got in store for us today? And so we were cracking jokes in the car, just having fun and laughter. And we made our way to Edgar and Daisy's house. We sat down, and Pastor Ken said, "I might be leaving." That smile went away from my face. And I was trying to remember, it's like, well, he said he might be leaving. He's not gone yet. And besides, maybe that church might tell him no. Then I realized he's too good for any church to say no. In a way, I wouldn't be surprised if Joshua felt the same way when Moses was no longer going to be with them, when he took over for Moses. Today, we're going to be looking at Joshua chapter 1, verses 1 through 9. We're going to be looking at just after the Israelites have spent 40 years in the wilderness. The reason for these 40 years in the wilderness was due to what happened with the 12 spies. We see that there were 12 spies sent into the promised land, particularly Jericho. And 10 of the 12 spies then said, "No, we can't go in there. There are giants in this land. We can't go in there." And so then God said, "Okay, for the next 40 years, you're going to be wandering in the wilderness." And so now that time is finally over. 40 years have passed. The Israelites are finally heading to the promised land, but without Moses. Today we're going to be looking at, again, Joshua chapter 1, and I invite you to look into that. We see in the first two verses of this passage that there is a change in command. So really quick here, I'm just going to share for those who are online. Right now it's just Susan, but just in case other people pop up. All right. So yes, again, there is a change in command here. Moses was not allowed to enter into the promised land because he had sinned against God. We see in Numbers chapter 20, it talks about how the sin that Moses committed, that it was during the time when Israelites needed water. And so God told Moses to go to the rock and speak to it, and then water would flow from it. However, Moses did not speak to the rock. Instead, he struck it twice. Yes, the water did flow from it, and the Israelites were able to drink from it. However, God was not happy about this. God gave him a command. He told Moses to speak to the rock, not hit the rock, not strike the rock. So God responded in Numbers 20, verse 12, saying, "But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." Joshua is the one who's taking over from Moses. And it's not that Moses is just going his own path. Moses is now dead. So going back to Joshua chapter 1, the first two verses, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them, to the Israelites. In this passage, we see God talking to Joshua one-on-one. Joshua is now in charge of the Israelites as they cross the Jordan River. They're crossing that Jordan River from the east side to the west. If you ever have any maps, that's a way that you can to know like what direction they're going in. They're not going from west to east, they're going from east to west. So the person who had been in command this whole time in the preparation to go into the promised land is no more. He is gone. Now, Joshua wasn't randomly selected from the Israelites. Moses didn't close his eyes and just pointed to a random person. It's like, oh, it's Joshua. See, Joshua was Moses' assistant, his second in command, his prodigy. Now, Joshua has been in training for these 40 years. In a way, it's kind of what Pastor Ken has been doing for myself and Paul these last few years. Now, we haven't been wandering around in the desert for 40 years. It's only been a few years, and we've just been in the basement as we talked. So it might not be the exact same situation as we see here in Scripture, but still a great education from an amazing mentor. Now, the name Joshua that was given at birth means salvation. Joshua was a part of the tribe of Ephraim, which is one of the tribes of Israel. There were 12 tribes in all. 10 of them were named after the sons of Jacob, and 2 of them were named after the sons of Joseph. Ephraim was one of the youngest sons of Joseph, and we see this in Genesis 41, 50 through 52. And if you like to look at that later on, you can. So again, that's in Genesis 41, verses 50 through 52. So Moses later gave Joshua, that was his original name, he then changed it to Joshua, which means Jehovah is salvation, which Joshua is actually the Hebrew name for Jesus. Joshua was known as Moses' assistant, as we talked about earlier. He was being groomed and instructed by Moses. So again, so that change in command from Moses to Joshua. But even though there was a change in command here, there was still the same promise that God gave. God had the same promise. So we see this in point number 2, verses 3 and 5. We see that even though there's a different person, the promise is still the same. And looking at verses 3 through 5, it says, I'll give you every place where you set your foot. As I promised Moses, your territory will extend from the desert of Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the great sea on the west. No one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. This is the same promise that God promised Moses as well as others in the past. This is the same promise gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we see in Exodus 3 that Moses, when he was at the burning bush, that he was going to bring the Israelites out of Egypt into the promised land. The land flowing with milk and honey. All these great leaders. And yet, even though there were hundreds of years separating these great men, these great biblical leaders, it is still the same promise throughout this time. Now let's take a look at verse 5 for a moment, which says, no one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. This promise is not only about going to the promised land, but how the Israelites would get it. It says that, but that no one will be able to stand up against you all the days of your life. No one would be able to stand up against them. I mean, personally, I think that's a great confidence boost, don't you? Already knowing you're going to be victorious before you even enter into the promised land? As a former athlete, having knowledge that, yeah, we're going to win this game no matter what, and we haven't even gone to the gym or the playing field, knowing we would win before the game even started, that would sure give me confidence. Already knowing that they would be victorious, being able to conquer the promised land before they even entered there. And also at the end of verse 5, we see something similar. You're probably thinking about Hebrews 13, verse 5, which says, keep your eyes free from the love of money and the content with what you have. Because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. See, that's kind of similar for what we saw in verse 5, like in Joshua 1, talking about, I will never leave you nor forsake you. See, that word forsake means to abandon or withdraw. God is saying that he will never abandon the Israelites. God is reassuring Joshua that he will be with them, that he is not going to leave. So we see that there are three parts to this promise. So the first part was that God will give them the land that he promised them, the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. And the second is that no one will be able to stand up against them. And the third part is that God will never leave them nor forsake them. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if Joshua was a little bit scared before going into the promised land. His mentor is now gone. He is now dead. And he's taking over of everything now. You know, reading this passage, it kind of reminds me a little bit about that rookie quarterback who has come to the professional league, and the coach is talking to him, hey, I'm not going to leave you. Sure, when you're on the field, I might not be next to you, but I'm going to be with you every step of the way. You see, in football, you might, I don't know if you've seen any like the Bears games or anything else, but the head coach has a headset on with a microphone connected to him. See, that microphone is that there's a signal that goes to the quarterback's helmet. There's actually a little speaker that goes into his headset. Now, I'm not talking about like these fancy headsets that a DJ has, but it's a speaker that the coach is able to send plays to him. So he can send plays on the field. So even though the coach might not be physically next to him, he has not gone away. The coach is still with him. Just like with God, he is still with Joshua. And he will never leave him nor forsake him. And now we move on to our third point. Again, so our first 2 points, there was a change in command. Joshua is taking over for Moses. The second point was that there was still God's same promise. That even though there had been lots of changes going around, there's still the same promise that God has. And now we move on to our third point, which talks about our strength comes from God. Our last 3 verses here, verses 6 through 9, or I think it's 4 verses, sorry about that. Sorry. So last 4 verses, 6 through 9, we look at our strength comes from God. See, like during this whole passage, it's kind of like God giving a pep talk to Joshua. See, Where is God telling Joshua where his strength comes from? Is it from spending time in the gym working out? Whereas the kids say you got to go to the gym to get swole. Or is it spending time in the library, getting all the head knowledge as you can, reading every book you can? It's not about the physical strength. It's not about the head knowledge. Yes, we do need the physical strength in order to be mobile and go places. But there is a strength that is far greater than any of these. Our strength comes from God. We gain strength from God when we are in moments of worry, fear, stress, anything else. We get a much stronger strength from God. See, 3 times in these last 4 verses, God says, be strong and courageous. Strong means overpower. And courageous is to be bold and determined. Maybe the reason why God had to say be strong and courageous so many times was because he had to continuously repeat himself to Joshua. Kind of like how Moses was at the burning bush. If you remember during that time, Moses was saying like, well, I'm not a great speaker. Like, I don't do well with crowds. Well, I was like, well, what if people don't believe me when I go back to Egypt and tell them that you sent me? It's like, you got the wrong guy. I'm not that type of guy anymore. I'm not a good leader. Joshua's probably saying the same thing. He's like, well, hey, you had a great leader. Why couldn't you just give him a little bit of time in the promised land and then I take over? It's like, well, I'm just too young. I'm not ready yet. Like, you got to get somebody else. But then God says, be strong and courageous. Verses 7 and 8, it says, only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. Do not turn to the right or the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For when you make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. If you've watched the Kentucky Derby, one of the most famous racehorse or horse races on the calendar, you might see some of the horses have blinders on. See, this is a way for a horse to just stay focused on the track ahead, not to get distracted by anything else. God is saying, stay to the law, meditate on it. Just like with our racehorse, just stay the path, just keep looking forward. Don't get distracted with what's going on over here or what's going on over here. Stay straight. Keep on this path, and you will have good success. In verse 9, we see God say to Joshua, haven't I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Maybe he said this, so God was probably saying, have I not commanded you? Probably just saying like, I've said this before. Why am I repeating myself again? And especially after such a short amount of time, it's like, be strong and courageous. Never will I leave you nor forsake you. Now, as we move on to our application, I have 3 questions that I want you to take with you today. First one is simply, where do I get my strength from? Do I get my strength from going to the gym like what we talked about earlier? Is it going to the mall? trying to shop for the newest fashion trends? Is it going to Starbucks, getting your latest $7 drink? Is it your job where you're getting your paycheck every other week? Where do I get my strength from? Again, I understand that we need the physical strength just to be mobile, just to make sure that we can like walk around, do stuff, or anything like that. But where do I get my emotional strength, my spiritual strength from? When I'm in a situation where I do not know what to do or where to go, where do I find my strength? The second question is, do I truly believe that God has never left me? I know there might be some times where you're in a stressful situation, trying to like you see all these pieces just of the puzzle just kind of falling apart. Even in moments like that, do I still believe that God is still with me? And finally, the third question, how do I react when I'm in a difficult situation? When those pieces of the puzzle fall, how do I react? Do I react with, okay, God is still with me? I'll just pick up these pieces and then just go at it again. Or do I cry? Do I complain? Do I run away from the situation? Do I trust in God that He will provide for me? Or do I just run and just ignore the problems? Look for the solution on my own. As we look into the future, we need to take every step in faith. Believe that God will take care of us. God protected the Israelites as Joshua took command. The Israelites were able to walk across the Jordan River on dry land. A very similar thing that happened with the Jordan River, like with the Red Sea and Moses. The waters parted, and the Israelites walked through on dry land. They were able to conquer the land of Jericho and so much more by trusting that God will take care of them. Real quick, I'm just going to stop the share right now. All right. So during these last few months have been unique, to say the least. The man who I called my mentor, the man who called me up 2 hours after I got laid off from my first professional job, offered me a potential position here. He took me under his wing, and now he's gone. Not the same situation happened with Moses here, but just Pastor Ken is just not physically here in this room. And yes, he's still going to be off at a ministry up in Minnesota. I miss him too. As we look to God, it was still with Joshua. I believe he's still with us today. I have confidence that God has some great plans for this ministry. And something that I thought of is how many churches can say that their leaders are Paul and Timothy? I understand we might not be the exact same people as we see in scripture, but it's a little something I like to keep in the back of my mind. As we continue to walk together in faith with God, I believe that God will take care of us, that He will provide for us, that He will not forsake us, that He'll be with us all the days of our life. Let us pray.